Yeah, hi, I'm Loaf, one of the founding contributors of Realms, Biblioteca DAO, and recently the one of the founders of the Dojo game engine, and I'm going to be talking about welding and the challenges of decentralized welding. So just starting off with a big statement, AWs and civilizations have more in common than you realize. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about worlds are really just networks. There's a big distinction there, and I loosely use both terms throughout this whole presentation, and I hope I make sense. If I don't, let's talk about this after. And then we're going to talk about are you building a world? Or are you building a game? And I think that's another important distinction whenever you're trying to do these things. And then finally, we're going to talk about some reflections on our personal lessons trying to build these worlds, and how we think we can create enduring worlds that last the test of time and will outlast the creators, which is really what we're trying to do with worlds and networks. I'm not going to really be talking about anything technical today, which is kind of which is kind of strange. I'm normally talking about technical stuff. So I'm going to talk about theory, and I hope that makes sense. Worlds are really just networks. Everything we do right now revolves around creating an interconnected community of people. And worlds and networks are very positive sum. They're greater than the sum of their parts. And this is contrast to companies, which are companies are very extractive, and they're very profit driven, which is fine, and that companies need to exist. But there's a strong line between trying to build a company and trying to build a network and trying to build a world. And so I come from a background of I've built a few companies in the past before I jumped into this crazy world. And that every companies and worlds have a place in this in this space. But there's a big distinction about it. And I'm under the impression that we need to, if we want to create everlasting networks and worlds, they have a few key parts. So I see there's a lot of people from the Lootverse here. So most of the people. So I'm going to be preaching to the choir here a bit. But I think these two things, the Roman Empire, the Colosseum, and loot, maybe it's a stretch saying they're the same, but we'll try to get there, right? So both started off with raw origins. Rome starting off as a little settlement with a big vision. Loot starting off as just this free on-chain NFT that's going to last forever. They both have a vision, and both of them will exist for a very, very long time. And that's both true, right? And so I see both of these things as worlds. Same with, I made this talk so I could talk about my two favorite things: Hellenistic Greece and autonomous worlds. And so these are some other worlds, right? We have the Alexander's Hellenistic Greek Empire. We have the Roman Empire. We have Ethereum. We have the internet, and we have Bitcoin, and they all share very, very similar origins. But worlds need a purpose to exist, right? And this is what drives them all. And Inception was right. Nothing is more powerful than an idea. And this is what all worlds and networks, this is what drives them all. And, once that idea is incepted into your brain, it's very, very hard to get rid of. And it spreads like a virus. And it's this shared idea that's embedded in all our minds and drives us to expand the network. And so here are some other networks that I see that are interesting. Life as a network, its purpose is it creates order from chaos. Religions have this shared belief system, and these are the tying factors that bring these networks and worlds together. Roman Empire, for the glory of Rome. That's what pushed the whole Roman Empire to expand into its glory. the internet, the information for all. Everybody wanted to build on the internet because you could share your idea to anyone instantly through the speed of light, and that was the that was its network effect, and that's what drove it to its what it is right now, which is insane. Bitcoin, money for all, shun the existing system and let's just do peer-to-peer. And that was a very simple idea by Satoshi, and look where it is now. And that's why we're all here right now as well. And then Ethereum, computing for all, an open computer that we can all use forever. And then Loot, open worlding for all. Loot really started off as this just a simple black JPEG. People thought it was nuts, but really the idea is that it's this world that anybody can contribute into and anyone can build on. And that was such a powerful idea, and it spawned a whole series of other worlds, which we'll get into. And then we have AWs, right, which will rehabilitate cultural artifacts and cultural production itself towards the solar punk future, right? And so, that's why we're here as well, because or maybe autonomous worlds will get us to a type 2 civilization. I hope so. But worlds need to be open. They need to be radically open for them to emerge, right? They need to be, they need to be radically open, and anyone can participate in them, and they need to be totally permissionless. And if they're not, you're not really building a world. You're just building some kind of closed system or isolated system. And so here are the two of the worlds that we're very familiar with, right? They share very common origins. Both very grassroots. Bitcoin was just dropped as a white paper and shipped. Very chaotic from the beginning, hacked, dirty, unpolished, unfinished. And the Bitcoin hack, when there was like 130 million that accidentally got minted. But it's still here today because it had those original beginnings, right? Then we have the Ethereum with its DAO hack. And that was chaotic, all right? And because the early Ethereum code was like, it wasn't quite finished. It had a lot of, it wasn't finished. But it was the grassroots of the unfinished, like releasing it to the world in its state was what made it to what it is today. And then, Ethereum Classic. But we're still here, right? And so the dirtiness of the origins of the world, how chaotic it is what what makes them stand the test of time. And we're here. And so it comes to the next part, right? And so we just talked about networks and worlds and their origins, and they need to start from messy beginnings. And so, some people here are building worlds, and some people here are building games, and that's fine. But I don't think a game is a world, and there's a distinction there. I think games exist within worlds, but they are not the world. And so what we try to do, or what I'm trying to do is, in the DAO, is we're really trying to build a world and not just a game. Worlds are messy. Worlds are messy or unrefined. They're chaotic because anyone can participate, and that's for better or worse. But games are very structured and refined. You don't start off with a Diablo 4, half finished and ship it, right? It's very polished. Well, debatable, but it's very polished and it gets shipped, and that's a game. But it's not a world. It's not a true world, in the sense, right? Worlds need to have many participants, and needs to be radical openness. And so we can talk about a few different worlding techniques, right? And so this is single creator worlding, right? And so a single creator worlding, it's all exists in the minds of the author. They're the benevolent dictator of this, right? And that's cool. That's fine. We all love Lord of the Rings, but ultimately you get sued if you try to build on top of it, right? And so they're always going to be limited in scope and where they can go. And now we move to centralized and decentralized worlding. I was trying to think of a name for this, Gen 1 decentralized worlding, but that doesn't really make sense. But we have some examples, right? And so we have this is how I see it. So we have RuneScape, very, pretty basic game, some enshrined laws, but the game really took a life of its own once it was released by the developers, but it's still closed off. And then we have like Warhammer. Warhammer has like a ridiculous world that's built around it, all by the community, all it's got a lot of lore because it came from this very humble beginnings, but it's a good case study in this. And then we have EVE Online. EVE was a very basic enshrined game to begin with, but as Hilmar said in his opening speech, it's really taken a life of its own, and really they don't really know what the game is. It's just spreadsheets now. But these simple beginnings, these simple games create this level of abstraction on top, and these worlds emerge. But ultimately, they can still be unplugged. And so they are still going to be limited in what they can do, right? So now we move to the fully decentralized worlding, right? And so this is what we're trying to do. And I don't know if I recommend it, but I think everyone should try it. So there's this thing called the Lindy effect, right? And so the Lindy effect is basically the longer that something's been around, the greater chance it has to survive. And so it's an interesting paradigm. And so what I take out of this is that worlds, when you're building worlds, they're akin to the Lindy effect. The longer they persist, the more likely they are to continue to exist. They evolve beyond your original creation. But it means that you need to ship these things, or these worlds need to exist as soon as possible. And so we start with we think about loot, right? So we think about this primordial soup, which loot came from. And so loot started as this basic single contract with this dense lore within it, but it was radically open, right? And so from this radical openness and this primordial soup, all this stuff emerged from it, which is kind of crazy. And I don't think there hasn't been another example like this. And so I think we'll be talking about loot for the long future. However crazy you think it is, it's here to stay. And people are building on it still, right? But it was the openness that did this. It was the openness and the hardness, right? No one can stop loot at this point. It's just on ETH. It will exist forever. It's a lore machine. But loot had its issues. Well, I was thinking about this slide, and I was thinking, well, maybe it didn't have any issues. I mean, we can think about issues on it, but it's still here. There's all these things that have emerged from it, so maybe it was right. But if you really think about, if you want to, if I was to redo loot from all over again, I'd probably build in some kind of basic funding mechanism that fed into a treasury that could then be distributed forever through a governance structure to people building on it. So that was one of the biggest, that was one of the problems that kind of the loot community got over. But if you were to do this again, you could build this thing in pretty simply into a contract. But that's what I would do. So then we go back to the primordial soup of loot, right? And so we have this recursive nature. So now we have realms, which spawned out of loot, right? And then we have all these other games that spawned out of realms, which is kind of crazy. So we get a whole other universe that's emerged now. And so we start from loot, and it's got still the loot DNA, but it's all emerged now because of its simple beginnings, because of its chaotic nature at the beginning. And lots of other games. And then we go again. So we have this other, there's this other group of people within the Realms ecosystem called Underdark. And, they're spawning their own worlds as well. And it's all the same. It's this recursive nature of this openness. This is what drives it. This is the network effect of a world once it gets going, but it needs to have the chaotic beginnings. You can't control it. You just have to let it go. And so the sooner the world starts living, the longer it has a chance for survival. And so, really the lesson here is ship your world as soon as you can. And so, now we're going to talk about creating enduring organic worlds. yeah, so this is a challenge. Are we right? I don't know. We'll find out in a decade. But this is the path we're going, because it's exciting, and this is what we want to do. And it's a hard path, right? Sometimes you do want a level of dictatorship, like in a corporate environment. But then again, you might get trapped in that environment, and you might never get into the world that you want to build. So maybe there's a perfect combination, but we haven't quite found it yet. But we're still digging. And so a personal reflection on trying to do this. So we tried to build the most complex, impossible world that was perfectly balanced. The first thing that we did. 1 minute. So yeah. Anyway, we tried to build a very complex world, and that was kind of nuts. Any game designer would probably feel my pain. But anyway, in the world, we wanted giant open world, open systems. Anyone can build 24 resources, complex combat systems, etc. But this is very wrong and impossible if you're trying to build a world. It's fine if you're building a game, but not if you're building a world. If you're building a world, it needs to start from the minimal viable physics. I mean, the minimal viable physics is basically the minimum enshrined laws you can put into a world or a game. And then into a world, and let the game and the world emerge from that. And I think this is the only way to build true worlds. Just like with Ethereum, just like Bitcoin, everything emerged from that basic beginnings. And so this is the most important thing I want anyone to take from this. This is how I see every world having to be created. Any true autonomous world has to start like this. It's Eternum today. And so we kind of redid it all, and we're starting from the beginning again. And we've made a lot of headway in the technology side, and the law side, and the theoretical side, and it's being done. We're building the minimal viable physics for this world, and it's going to ship, and it's going to be open, and people are already building on it. And so we aspire to build a world like this. We're going to build this world that's going to last forever, and maybe like the Roman Empire, or a long time anyway, until there's a cataclysm. Because there's no single controlling entity in this world. Equal participation for all, and it's messy and it's dirty, but that's good. And so the takeaways here are, to build enduring worlds, you got to embrace radical openness, however crazy that feels. And if you're coming from a corporate environment, that might sound insane. And worlds need a mission, and it transcends a single game. And it's the single mission, and it's the single idea that drives these worlds. And the longer a world exists, the greater chance it has of survival. So you got to ship your world as soon as possible. And so I'll leave you with a question of, are you building a world or are you building a game?